Hey Bookaholics, and welcome back to another reading vlog. Today I am doing my second reading vlog of the month. I have decided that I'm dedicating September to reading fantastical academia, dark academia, light academia, etc. Last week I did read 3 books which were If I Were a Dark Academia Student, in which I read a classic, a non-fiction and a literary fiction to get me in the mood for actually reading dark academia. And this week I am in fact reading 3 dark academia novels. The books in question are The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is one that is lauded as the grandma of dark academia. It's kind of the one that set off the trend that we are now in, where every autumn we get a few new dark academia releases. I believe this is the be all and end all. I have heard some problematic things about Donna Tartt and her representation within her books, so I am going to proceed with caution, but I am curious to see the book that started off the subgenre, so I'm excited to try it, but also apprehensive. I believe that this is the story of a group of college students or university students who are under the tutelage of a classics professor who teaches them new ways of living and thinking. However, when their actions begin to push past the boundaries of what is considered moral or ethical, their lives are changed forever. I don't know anything more about the synopsis of this. I've not looked further into it. That is enough for me to get going, so I'm excited to try this one out. The next book that I have is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This one is a dystopian, I believe, style dark academia in which we are following Kathy. And Kathy is now 31 years old and she is just about coming to terms with her childhood, which she spent in the seemingly idyllic Halisham school, where a fate has always awaited her and her closest friends once they entered into the wider world. Again, don't know a huge amount more about this, but I am very excited to try out Kazuo Ishiguro. He's an author who I'm very curious about. I have a couple of his works and I am excited to try this one out. And the last one that I have is the one I'm most excited for, and that is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This one is a YA dark academia that is about a girl named Felicity Morrow who has always considered Dalloway School her home. It's her place of comfort. That is until last year when her girlfriend died. Dalloway School is always known for its ties to the occult, including the rumor that there are girls who dabbled in witchcraft and they still haunt the corridors to this day. Enter new girl, Ellis. And Ellis is a novelist and a prodigy, and she is now wanting to write a novel about the history and these witches that are associated with Halisham School. Felicity knows full well the dangers of looking into the school given what happened to her girlfriend, but unable to resist Ellis, they both delve in way past where they should be. And I am very excited for this one. This is the one I'm most anticipating reading. I just think this one's going to give me all the witchy, spooky vibes that I kind of want from a dark academia. I have put a poll on Instagram for these 3, and as it currently stands, The Secret History and A Lesson in Vengeance are tied for first place. So as soon as that poll finishes, I will select the winner and then I will start reading that one. And I will probably do a before I start my expectations, etc. Then I will do a halfway through the book check-in and then a conclusion check-in for each of these books. So if you just want to know my overall thoughts, then I will leave the timestamps for the check-in. So the winner of the Instagram poll ended up being A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. Now, going into this, I was anticipating that this would be a YA romance with a dark academia backdrop. From the synopsis, you know that from the get-go, the protagonist's girlfriend died the year before due to something to do with the witches that haunt this school. Fast forward a year after girl's demise, and we have a new student who is a prodigy of literature who is brought into the school and befriends our protagonist. And then this new student wants to also be looking into the witches, which our protagonist is apprehensive to do given what happened to her girlfriend, but she ends up kind of getting roped in anyway. So I am about halfway into this one now. I'm on page 194 out of 300 and something. If you're looking for the vibes that you have from The Wicked Deep by Shay Arnshaw, if you want the atmosphere from that book, this one's an excellent one for that, because it has past legend of these witchy women. You want to figure out exactly what happened to them. Were they actually witches, etc.? And then you have a modern day timeline where you are also trying to investigate something else. So that is giving me those vibes in that sense. That being said, this is a very inclusive novel. We have trans representation, we have obviously the protagonist is queer, we have mental health representation in here as well, we have talks of classism, we have a brief mention of racism within elite institutions. It's a very fascinating school as well. I really like the setup of the school. We actually have a map for the school going on here, which is very cool, and I really like the setup that we have. I'm really enjoying our protagonist because I understand her to an extent. She's going through grief, which I don't understand massively, of her best friend slash girlfriend. We are also seeing her try and move on with her life. What I think I empathize with her on is her concerns of her own fragility. Like, she thinks that feeling makes her fragile. She thinks that looking into her mental health and actually analyzing it, a sign of weakness, it can derail you, it can be concerning. She comes across very real in that sense. Also, just following characters who have this pretentiousness about them, a love of literature. It's very apt for readers. And then yes, also we have the dark academia setup, we have the witchy backdrop, like I said. So far I'm having a really good time with this book. Better than I thought I would, and that's saying something because this is probably the one I'm most excited for the vlog, which is quite foreboding for the rest of it, I suppose. I hope to finish this today and I will be able to get back to you, but so far so good. I am very intrigued about both the current day mystery-ish thing that we have going on, and also about the past timeline with the kind of more witchy girls in the 1700s, which again I find fascinating. I'm also very invested in the interpersonal relationships, even though it moves very quickly. I'm less than 200 pages in and we already have some movement happening here with the interpersonal relationships. I am still engaged with them and I'm still interested in them. Once I conclude the novel, I will get back to you and I will be able to let you know my final thoughts. Hey gang, so I have finished A Lesson in Vengeance. I'm about to go film a different video, but I thought since I'm all made up, I might as well check in. And I have very mixed feelings about this book. It's not the book that I hoped it would be, but I also feel like there is just a general disappointing ending in this story. So the story presents you 3 stories in one. Essentially, we have the protagonist, Felicity. Her girlfriend died and a lot of people believe that she murdered her. There's no hard evidence for this and Felicity had a breakdown over it. Felicity still has fears when it comes to her ex-girlfriend. I was interested in that part of the story. I was looking forward to finding out exactly why people would believe that she was murdered, why Felicity particularly feels so guilty. So there's that story. Then we have the present timeline, and in the present timeline, Felicity is befriending the new girl who is a prodigy. She's a bit aloof, she's a bit strange, but she is very well regarded. She's a novelist and she's wanting to write a book in this school. So this girl has befriended Felicity and it's their relationship and it's what is going on with these girls because they are investigating a different timeline. The different timeline is that in the early 1700s, you had 5 girls who were murdered and connected to witchcraft. So the present day girls are investigating the past day girls, reenacting what happened to them. 3-tiered story of like the girls in present day. You have Alex, which is Felicity's deceased girlfriend. And then we have the historical timeline in the 1700s where we're trying to figure out what exactly happened with these girls. I don't feel like the resolution for the historical timeline exists. There are hypotheses, but it doesn't actually get a conclusive ending. So if you are reading this book specifically because you are liking the historical timeline, then you are going to be sorely disappointed. I also found that some of the motivations for the characters and the things that they do in the end is also not something that I can buy into. Overall, I just found that the book itself was a 4-star read. Like, it was really compelling. I was enjoying the characters, even though they didn't feel very realistic. I still was enjoying them. I enjoyed some of the discussions that happen around elitism, around privilege that comes from classism, from white privilege, the discussions around coming out of the closet and making sure that you feel ready. So many important discussions were had in this book, only for the ending to then be inconclusive and make the whole book feel a bit pointless, which is such a shame. I've given it 3 stars. I ran it through Corpal because I wasn't sure. I did scrape its 3 stars. I don't know how to recommend this book. I might, if anyone is interested, I'll either do a spoiler review here, or I can do a spoiler review, like a spoiler section of a review on Goodreads. If anyone's interested, let me know. I normally keep my reviews spoiler free, especially for a standalone. Like sequels, I'll sometimes maybe talk about the previous book, but I always try and keep my reviews spoiler free so that they can reach their audience. If you would like me to do a spoilery discussion for this one, I am happy to do so, because I feel like there is a lot to say. Does mean that my next read is going to be The Secret History. This is the one that got a 2nd place in the poll that I did on Instagram. I'm just doing it in the order that the Instagram poll dictates, and this is the next book. This one is a campus novel that is dark academia, so it's set in a university. We are following, I've looked into it a little bit more now, but we are following 6 individuals. They go to this very, very prestigious liberal arts college, university if you are English, and while they are there, there is a professor who only takes on a very, very select few students, normally no more than 5. We are following our protagonist, who comes from a impoverished background, I believe. I don't know exactly the level of impoverished. He still manages to get a scholarship into the school. He manages to get in with this professor. This group of university students who are with this professor all create a toxic friendship group. They are trying out lifestyles and Greek philosophies from this professor, and then things go horribly wrong once their morals start to slip. I don't know how I'm going to feel about this book. I don't know, because I know it's got a level of pretension, which can be good, can be annoying. I hope that this book, the thing is, I've heard not good things about Donna Tartt, so I don't know if she's going to be discussing the things I want her to be discussing in a dark academia like this. So there is the hope that she will pull through and there'll be some really interesting conversations to be had in this novel. I'm not holding my breath. We'll see how this goes. I'll check in once I have read some. I am now halfway into The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So thankfully this book is literally divided into 2 halves, so it made it very easy for me to know when to check in. This is the story of 6 university students who are at an elite liberal arts college in Vermont. And in it, we are following this group of students who are the only ones that have been selected to be part of this very prestigious group that is run by the classics professor, who only selects normally a maximum of 5 students. He ends up accepting a 6th, which is our protagonist. Our protagonist is from a very boring part of California. His father runs a gas station. His mother's the secretary. He has a very boring humdrum life. His parents wanted him to become a doctor because they don't see any point in studying things like literature or Greek, and they wanted him to stay there, take over his father's gas station, etc. He decides that he doesn't give a shit about any of that he wants to study classics and literature, so he has left his hometown and on a scholarship gotten into this university. So now we are following him as he lies his way through everything, because he's telling everyone that he comes from a richer background than he actually does, that his father and mother are in showbiz in LA instead of in this really boring part of California. He joins in with this group of kids who are all slightly unhinged, and they are all incredibly wealthy and incredibly elite, etc. This book, so far, what I am gathering from it is not really a book about plot or characters. It's about ideas, but it's pretending to be a book with a plot than characters. Now, I don't mind reading a book that is almost entirely about ideas. I don't mind reading a book that's entirely vibes. I mean, I love Erin Morgenstern, and 90% of her stories are just vibes. I do not mind reading books solely for the atmosphere or solely for it to be a playground for any kind of social discussion, be it philosophical, be it sociological, be it psychological. I don't mind that. But this book is pretending that it has strong characters and pretending that it has a strong plot. The plot is literally a playground for the author to impose philosophical ideals so she can link it back to Greek. So basically, they're studying Greek and Greek stories with this professor while she is paralleling those Greek stories. And if that had been the point of the novel, fantastic. Like, I don't mind that because that's intriguing to me. But it's not. It's trying to pretend that it's about these characters and their social development and their psychological outlook as opposed to a philosophical outlook. So it's just not working for me. If it were a take on philosophy, if these characters could be completely null and void, I wouldn't care because it would be still incredibly creative and innovative. For me, however, what this book is doing is basically being a character study, but we don't have very strong characters. I am definitely going to give credit where credit is due, at least so far. Donna Tartt's discussions around philosophy, especially the more negative sides of philosophy like nihilism, I think is really, really interesting. And I'm hoping that it's going to serve a purpose in the latter half. But as it currently stands, we have a protagonist who feels so bland, it's almost like they were created to be a self-insert. But you get too much focus on his thoughts and feelings and his backstory for you to be able to genuinely self-insert, because normally self-insert character doesn't go too much into feelings so that you can project your own feelings onto the character, which is just not happening in this book. You get a lot of discussion around how this character is feeling and what they do or don't want from a circumstance, which means that you can't self-insert. But the character is too bland to feel like someone you actually care about and want to follow an entire novel from their perspective, in my personal opinion. He doesn't feel like a character you would care about. Next, we have the group of friends, where we have two friends that have distinct personalities. We have one who had an accident as a kid, is really bright, but didn't graduate high school, but read a load and now can speak a lot of languages, and is kind of the leader of the group because they're the smarter one, sort of, but they also have questionable social skills because they've not really been socialized because of being homeschooled because of this accident. Then the other one that has a distinct personality, their personality is just everything that could make someone an asshole thrown into one character. You literally have someone who is a misogynist. You have someone who is a homophobe. They're basically the intellectual version of the character that kicks the dog in a scene. You know how it's like the easiest and most cliche way to make you hate someone in a novel or in a movie is you get them to kick the dog. Well, he's the intellectual version of that. Like, he's lazy. He's, like I said, a misogynistic homophobe. He has like a superiority complex that is clearly a facade for someone who's incredibly insecure. You have someone who wants to think that they're super charismatic, but you actually gives you the ick to be in the same room as. Like, he's literally the intellectual version of the guy that kicks the dog. And then after that, you have three other friends. You have the one who is basically agoraphobic, or like on the border of, who is kind of a bit more meek and insecure. You have twins who are a girl and a guy, and she's the only girl in the group, and the only thing that distinguishes her from anyone else is that she's the only girl in the group. And like, that's it. Like, they don't have distinctive enough personalities, and they aren't interesting enough for me to have this much focus on characters. For example, this book is very heavy on the dialogue, which I wasn't actually expecting going in, but it's very heavy on the dialogue. And it being heavy on dialogue does not make sense for this story. As much as it's obviously clearly about the discussions these characters are having about the philosophies of their lives, the dialogue doesn't work because none of the characters are distinct enough that I would be able to know who is talking if I didn't have a marker. Like, if it didn't say, she said, then I know it's the girl. If it says, Bunny said, or Henry said, or Francis said, then I know who's talking. But if you're in a room of like 10 people and it just says he said, well, there are like multiple options of who the fuck said it, and I don't know because there isn't a distinct enough tone, mannerism, speech style that would make it distinctive enough. So as it currently stands, on the one hand, I think that she is doing a really, really fascinating job with the philosophy of the story, with the way she's approaching it on an intellectual level, on a literary level as well, where it's discussing, like I said, like paralleling so many different forms of literature throughout the ages. I think she's doing that absolutely fantastically, but she's put so much focus on that for herself as the writer, but hasn't followed through for me as the reader, because she's putting too much emphasis on the characters and the plot, which are the weakest points of the story. If the plot was just there for something for the characters to do, if the characters were just there for her to have a personification of different ideals, I think it would be really, really interestingly executed. But as it currently stands, she's focusing on all the wrong things, and I don't care. Well, I have now finished The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Do I think this book improved? Kind of, I guess. It very much, it was an interesting discussion around nihilism. I think that it did that well. I think it also did slightly delve into things like the belief of being untouchable when you are privileged. I think it discussed that slightly. I think it discussed morality in a very interesting way, but I don't think that any of those discussions actually went anywhere near in depth for me personally. So I don't think that this book realistically lived up to my expectations, which is a shame because I had hoped for greater things from it. But that being said, it's an older work, and lots of books have built their foundations on this book. So clearly it did something that the rest of the dark academia world decided they wanted to pursue. It's not necessarily a book that I will think about. It's not one that is going to stay with me, but it's also not one that I think is pointless. I just think that between there being some very questionable representations, especially discussions around things like homophobia, around racism, around any of those social quandaries, I think they would have been better off if they were never brought up. Like, you have this one of the characters being homophobic, and it wasn't worthwhile. It was to make you dislike them potentially, but it wasn't worthwhile. It didn't need to be there. So I think I would prefer it if she just left those things alone. I have heard that the rest of her works are even worse when it comes to representation as well. So I won't be picking up any more of her books. I only picked this one up because of this vlog and because it was in my charity shop for €1. I won't be picking up any more of her books. I didn't find this one satisfying in any way. I understand why people would like it. I understand why people would be interested in it, but it wasn't for me. I don't think that I'm getting the discussions out of it that I want to be having. Does mean then that I'm going to be transitioning into my final read for this vlog, and that is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This one is a dystopian, I believe, a dystopian dark academia. We're set in a school that is in the English countryside that seems idyllic, and it has this really rigorous, really well-rounded education system. And we're following it from the perspective of Kathy, who is 31 years old, and she is at a point in her life where she is reflecting on her time in this school and what it did and didn't prepare her for in the real world. I'm very excited to be getting into this one. I have been dying to read Kazuo Ishiguro. I have two of his works on my shelves. This one is one of them. I'm excited to get into it. Hi gang, so I am now halfway into Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and this one is very interestingly written. It definitely takes you a while to get into it because you're getting it from the perspective of Kathy, who used to go to this school named Hailsham, and when she was a child, she had this very rigorous, very culture orientated upbringing at this school, and it's a boarding school, it's a living school, and we are discussing what her life was like in that school, including her friendships, etc. Then we are also in today, in modern day, well, no, not in modern day, in the 90s, where Kathy is a carer. And we don't know exactly what she's a carer for. It seems like she's a carer for people who are donors. I don't know the full extent of what that means yet, but she is a carer for donors. And it is a very fascinating take on it because it's told with really cold diffidence. It's her reflecting back on her time in a really clinical way, in a really aloof and standoffish way. And it took me a while. I didn't think I was gonna like it, actually. Like, it took me a while, and then I was like, actually no, this cold deference of emotion so that she can tell the story, I think is highlighting that this is going to be a dark book, that it's going to have trauma, and she's got that emotional shutdown so that she's actually able to tell the story. And I think that it's going to be either really, really well written and the payoff will be worth it, or I'm going to be like, oh, okay, so it was just written that way, and that would be kind of sad. So I'm excited to continue. I am having a really interesting time with this one because the social discussions are so subtle at the moment. I imagine that they're all going to come like a rock slide in a minute, but at the minute they're quite subtle, aside from a couple of things that I won't get into. And her relationship with her friends at the school is also really interesting. She has her best friend Ruth, who is a bitch, but I kind of like her, even though she's an absolute bitch. And then you have Tommy, who is the typical kid that gets bullied, but you like him, but you feel sorry for him, but also you don't want to feel sorry for him because he doesn't want you to feel sorry for him. It's interesting. And yeah, and then you have Kathy, who doesn't have a huge amount of personality, but I think that, again, it comes from her. She a lot of the time says, I don't know if I actually did this thing. I can't remember. I could be misremembering. So it is literally like someone telling their story. It's like, you always remember yourself in a potentially better or worse light. You almost never see it just as it is. So it's very fascinating to be getting this perspective, and the way it's written definitely feels that way. So I'm excited to continue, and I will let you know in my final update when I have finished this one. Alrighty gang, I have finished Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I think this is my favourite one of the vlog. I had a really fascinating time with this. I can't say I enjoyed it because it's really just depressing. Like, it's not even like it's like dark and spooky and creepy like Lesson in Vengeance. It's not even like it's everyone's really messed up and not nice people either. It's literally just everything is bleak. It's just really depressing. It's so grim. I had a good time with this. I definitely think that the payoff was worth it. I believe I said in the previous clip that I was worried that the payoff wouldn't be there for how distant Kathy is from you as the reader through her narrative voice. I did find the payoff to be worthwhile. I did find that the character growth was really, really well executed. I think that Kazuo Ishiguro did a really good job of making characters that feel like they're going through something that is really horrific. I think this is my favorite one. This is the hardest one to talk about because it's actually really easy to spoil. I am going to watch the movie tonight, so yeah, I hope that I enjoy it, but I don't think it will live up to the book. I hope I enjoy it. It's got Keira Knightley and Karen Mulligan and Andrew Garfield in it, so I'm hoping that it's good. That's a pretty decent cast. But yes, so this is the best book I've read of the vlog. It's definitely more a dystopian, more a pseudo sci-fi-ish kind of story, but it's mostly literary. Like, don't go into it expecting the amount of aesthetic for dark academia that you would get from a dark academia, and don't go in expecting this to be a sci-fi. I've seen so many reviews on there that are saying, this is sci-fi, I want my sci-fi to be more action-packed. It's like, it's not. It's literary fiction that incorporates some sci-fi. If you are normally a sci-fi fan, if you're a Becky Chambers fan, or you're a James S.A. Corey fan, this is not it. This is literary fiction. The reviews were very interesting because, again, there was a lot of people that had gone into this thinking it was going to be dystopia or sci-fi, and it's not. It's literary. It just has elements of dystopia in the society that it's about, but the writing style and the way that the story is told and the focuses of the story are very much the literary part. So bear that in mind. But yeah, had a really good time, and now let's do a quick wrap up. So These are the books that I read for this vlog. The first one that I read was A Lesson in Vengeance, which I loved up until the end, and then the ending sucked. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars, a low 3 stars overall. The next one that I read was The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which the beginning felt really pointless and superfluous. The ending did actually get more interesting in terms of its discussions, but I don't think that it delved deep enough into any of the discussions that I was interested in. But it does have incredible homages and nods to classics, to literature, to more humanities side of education and academia, which I think were well executed. So overall I gave it 3 stars. There were lots of cons but also lots of pluses. And the last one that I read is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, which I ended up giving 4.5 stars. This is one that definitely delved into the discussions. It was a character study, but it also was discussing ethics and morals from us as a society. I think it did a really good job of discussing those really hard topics, and I think that it was told through a very aloof tone, which initially I found difficult to get into. But overall, I think it did a really good job with it because it allowed you to project your own emotions instead of them be guided by the way the protagonist is telling their story. It is very dark and it is very literary, so do bear that in mind if you're going to be going into this book. So that's it. That's everything that I have read this week. My 3 dark academia novels. Let me know if you've read any of these and your thoughts on them, and also other dark academias that you would recommend. I'm looking forward to getting to Babel, especially by R.F. Kuang, but I do have a list that I am forever hoping to add to, so let me know which ones you would recommend based on my results here. That is all for me for today, so thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye!